Hey everyone, I'm Diana Davison, an advocate for the falsely accused and wrongfully convicted. There are so many things I'd like to talk about this weekend that it's been difficult to choose. I usually try to look at specific cases because it's more effective than speaking in generalities on an obviously very complex subject. Instead of debating whether or not false accusations occur, or debating how common or rare they are in sexual assault, we can look at a specific case and the people who it involved. Every case is unique and involves different dynamics. And one that keeps coming back is whether or not a person accused of sexual assault should be granted anonymity in the press until or unless they're convicted in a court of law. This issue is usually debated after a high-profile case is exposed as a false accusation, and the public wants to alleviate their guilt or shame at having destroyed an innocent person's life. The most compelling argument against anonymity for both complainants and the accused is a good one. When you allow trials to take place in secret, there's no ability for the public to ensure that the trials are being held fairly. Basically, it leads to star chamber courts where foundations of justice are not upheld because no one's allowed to oversee it. The checks and balances disappear. So individual dignity and privacy is overridden for the public good. Even if we grant anonymity in criminal cases, it doesn't fix the name and shame campaigns on social media, which clearly don't have incarceration as a goal. They are quite satisfied with suicide or loss of employment for the rest of the accused's natural life. The public, aside from a few who are willing to sacrifice a few innocent men to catch the guilty ones, do feel a sort of shame when they find out the person they socially ostracized turned out to have been falsely accused. Liability over that issue is being adjudicated in UK courts right now in the case of Sir Cliff Richards. And when the decision is made, we're likely to move on and forget about him according to the current news cycle. We don't like to make mistakes, and unfortunately when it happens, we don't like to learn from it. Now, public shaming does serve a social purpose. It's meant to steer the subject towards corrective behavior. Before the internet, shaming was localized and the mob was smaller, and they could release the subject from ostracization when the lesson was deemed to have been learned. With internet outrage culture and the memory of the World Wide Web, it no longer is a controlled phenomenon. Shaming from one group is countered by shaming from another, or even weirder, the originating group may turn against their own, leaving a wake of bodies in its path that ventures into absurdity. And then we move on, stepping over the corpses and quickly forgetting them, until the next target is chosen and it starts all over again. We tell ourselves that just because we've forgotten about them, the shaming somehow disappears for the victim as well. In sexual assault allegations, the justification is to protect vulnerable accusers and thus society from a perceived threat. The moral basis is supporting an underdog. For those who rally to defend the accused, the justification is to protect besieged individuals from harmful lies or malicious gossip. The moral basis is supporting an underdog. The debate focuses on arguing about who is the underdog, not actually about the facts of the individual case. People prefer to root for the weaker of two teams when all else is equal and when the facts are unknown. Then, because we're arguing about which side has power instead of arguing the specific facts of a case, we forget about the actual people at the heart of the debate. These casualties are incidental. Internet outrage relies on the individuals under attack becoming symbolic of a greater evil, representatives of a social narrative battle. The narrative that a man accused of sexual assault is part of white male privilege or a symbol of toxic masculinity, the trick of talking about violence as male violence, the insistence on talking about oppression of women in general, well, it's all part of a ruse to turn a specific allegation against a specific person into a battle over who is the underdog. The New Yorker published an interesting article by Maria Konnikova almost 2 years before #MeToo was launched, and it was called How the Internet Has Changed Bullying. Many forms of adult bullying are uncomfortably close to the sorts of shaming behaviors outlined by John Ronson in his recent book, So You've Been Publicly Shamed. That's a great book that everyone should read, link below. Ronson documents the rise of cyber brigades which unite in virtual outrage on Twitter, Reddit, or elsewhere online to disparage someone's words or behavior. Participants often feel that their abusive actions flow from justified outrage, but all bullies think that their behavior is justified. We know from moral disengagement work that all bullies feel morally justified in their actions. Susan Swearer, that's a bullying expert, pointed out, ask people why they bully, and they rarely say, because I can. They say, because I need to. Bullies believe they are teaching someone a lesson. They claim that their victims are, through their own actions or faults, asking for it, and that they need to be called out and corrected. They say it's retaliatory. I just retaliated, Swearer said. They build narratives of their behaviors. Many of the bullies Swearer's dealt with don't seem to have realized that what they did was bullying. They demonstrate a lack of insight and self-awareness. Instead, they see themselves as righteous crusaders. And is it not righteous to rush in when you see someone being pummeled and try to fight off their attackers? My YouTube channel has taken me on a journey. I began by mocking a group of people, feminists, who I felt, and still feel, were spreading misinformation in a dangerous way. Mocking and humor is quite effective, and one of the few things that works when dealing with people who just keep repeating lies to drown out the facts. When one person in a room is saying, for example, actually the wage gap isn't based on sexism, but 199 people in the room are saying, the wage gap exists and is proof of patriarchy, well then no one hears or values the one voice, no matter how much proof the one person offers. If you look at each individual woman's income and show that it was based on life choices, you get met with, cool story, bro. If you look at an individual we know was falsely accused, well, they say it's an anomaly. When we talk about sexual assault accusations online, we aren't asked to #believe because Jane Doe happens to be a credible person who we know is a victim. We're told to believe Jane because she's an underdog. She's part of a class of people who have a narrative of oppression. If you ask too many questions about Jane, well, you're re-victimizing her assumed victimhood. You don't need to know Jane to know how to feel about her accusation. You just need to know her gender and what hashtags she used when she told her story. What I've found as I've moved into focusing on individual cases is that the most important part of the solution, if I may offer one, is that we must never forget that we're dealing with real people who have facts to their lives. It is never an insult to ask who Jane Doe is and why we should believe her. I want to know because I treat people like Jane as unique individuals, not as symbols of a group narrative. If Jane doesn't want to answer questions, then Jane should not be making public statements. I'll tell you why. #MeToo is a death factory. People, real people, are committing suicide, and their deaths are being swept under the collective rug, while the person who caused the death with the accusation is busy writing a new book and giving media interviews and being hailed as a hero. For people familiar with my videos, you'll notice that this video is ending and I haven't made some kind of joke or used a funny video clip to make my point. There is nothing funny about this callous disregard for human life. I don't know how we're going to solve it, but I do know one thing. Every accusation is about a real human being who has a real life, and if we stop caring about that, then we've lost humanity completely. This is not a video about feminism. This is a video about the value of human life.